Hi everyone! Thank you for having me at today's Equal Pay Day Summit, and an extra big thank you to the Ladies Get Paid team for organizing such an important event. My name is David Buckmaster, and I'm coming to you today from Portland, Oregon. I'm the author of the upcoming book, Fair Pay: How to Get a Raise, Close the Wage Gap, and Build Stronger Businesses. The book comes out on June 29th from Harper Business, and you can pre-order it now wherever you like to buy your books. My day job is in corporate compensation. I lead paid design teams at large companies, deciding who gets paid what and why, and making sure it all comes together in a way that is seen by employees as fair and equitable. I've worked at the headquarters of companies like Nike, Starbucks, and Yum Brands, which is KFC, Pizza, and Taco Bell. I traveled all over the world, helping business leaders and HR professionals sort out the good and the bad of how pay works in their companies. To be sure, there's a lot of bad in how pay works now, especially when it comes to equal pay and low wage work. But I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, too. So today I'm speaking with you not as a formal representative of any company, but to share my personal experiences in the field of corporate compensation. I'll start by trying to bring clarity to how companies really think about equal pay and making sure we get there as soon as possible. Then I want to give you one big tip to level up your next pay conversation with your company using the language of my field. The truth is, people don't usually know that jobs like mine exist. When we talk to people about our work, they assume we work in payroll or benefits or something similar, and that honestly works to our favor. Sometimes we lean into this anonymity advantage in the same way that as an American, sometimes when traveling abroad, it's just easier to say you're Canadian. This helps us manage initial expectations because everyone loves Canadians and avoid follow-up questions that we don't want to answer, like, why are you underpaying me? We hear that a lot. And never has anyone come up to me and said, thank you for paying me enough money. Please make it stop because it's just too much. You should also know that compensation professionals operate in a small world. We all take the same classes, attend the same conferences, and look at the same sets of third-party market data, which of course isn't available to the public. The point here is that there's very little variation in how companies think about pay, so a little bit of insider knowledge can go a long way. So when we talk about equal pay, we have to start with the basics and how my field thinks. What do companies mean when they say equal pay? Here, I'm sorry to say, there's no standards. While many companies do take equal pay very seriously, and I'm optimistic about the progress being made behind the scenes by my peers, you should know that while we may think about pay in the same ways, no two companies are operating from the same playbook and making sure equal pay is the new normal. Yes, it's true that in the US, equal pay is a law. But companies are able to decide what that means for themselves, which leaves a ton of room for interpretation. You should know there are no requirements now that a company must ever run a formal analysis for equal pay, and globally it's even more complex. In the UK, companies do have a legal standard. They report on the pay gap between men and women for salary and bonus. They calculate average salary and bonus for women by the average salary and bonus for men. This one is my personal favorite because it's so simple. There's very little room for companies to play games with the reporting, and you don't need to run a bunch of complex statistics. In France, equal pay looks different. It's an index. It's a blend of 5 different gaps, like the pay gap, like we just talked about, the pay increase gap, the promotion gap, the percent of women with a raise the year after returning from maternity leave, and the number of women among the top 10 highest salaries. By the way, in France, companies aren't allowed to collect data on race, so your company has no idea what those gaps even look like. If you're at the summit, you clearly care a great deal about equal pay, and I bet you get enormously frustrated when you hear people, and let's be honest, many of whom look a lot like me, say things like, well, the real pay gap is X, or, well, actually, when you control for X, Y, and Z, the pay gap goes away. In a study by PayScale, 46% of men and 38% of men overall believe the pay gap is a made-up thing to serve a political purpose. But what I'm here to tell you is what you already know. This isn't true, and those people are wrong. Pay gaps are real, and nobody in my profession who actually looks at this data in their company would say otherwise. And this is why it's so important that you challenge people about the definitions they use, because the words matter. There are 2 broad categories of equal pay standards: pay gap and pay equity. There are many ways to calculate these results, but a good showing on one doesn't negate a poor showing on another. Here's what I mean. The pay gap at a high level is like what we saw in the UK. Average pay for women divided by average pay for men. If men make $100,000, women make $81,000, then you divide it, and you can say things like women make 81 cents on the dollar for every dollar a man makes. That's what we call the raw or unadjusted pay gap, and clearly that's a big problem all in its own right. Here's the hard part though. Unless this calculation is legislated, as it is in the UK, most companies are not directly trying to close the pay gap. Instead, they focus on something different called pay equity. This means that they take that X, Y, and Z from earlier, things like job level, resulting pay range, years of experience, and your last performance rating, all of which have really serious assumptions built into them to begin with, and they sanitize the data first. Now, companies can say things like, for every dollar a man earns, a woman earns $1 too, and they're not wrong to say that. But remember, there are no standards for this. The company chooses how to cut its data, and will do so as it sees fit. The best companies do use third-party vendors to make sure the calculations haven't been gamed, but for legal reasons, few companies make these calculations transparent. The two methods of pay gap calculations, pay gaps and pay equity, mean a company can show both a large pay gap and a small or even non-existent pay equity gap. Think of this as two lenses on the same camera, whereas they both matter. A company's pay gap can be 81 cents on the dollar, while they loudly celebrate their $1 for $1 pay equity ratio. Practically, companies have gotten good at achieving $1 to $1 pay equity ratio, and this is something we should celebrate. It was only a few years ago when companies didn't even do this kind of work. The solving for pay equity is both too easy and not enough. Pay equity only measures how a company is living up to its own pay policies that they designed in the first place. So if we really want to stop having to mark Equal Pay Day on our calendar as an annual reminder that we have serious pay problems, then we need to get more serious about the pay gap. The best thing we can do to solve the pay gap beyond transparent reporting requirements is to solve the representation gap. The pay gap closes when the career gap does. This means we need more women and those in underrepresented groups to hold more positions of authority and power. Full stop. If a company or country is serious about equal pay, they will see that with greater representation and leadership, the pay gap shrinks. In parallel, my field has to fundamentally evolve to account for the historical, purpose-built structural disadvantages that undervalue jobs that have always been dominated by women and underrepresented communities. These are big problems, but what does it mean for you personally? I want to leave you with one big tip to help you think like a compensation pro and to make sure your personal career gap is closed. As I've said, nearly all companies use the same sets of third-party tools to set pay. And your pay is attached to what we call your job level, but your company and compensation team likely thinks of your job level differently than you do. So I want you to use our field's language to make sure you are in the right job level, because the pay data you found on the internet by searching your title is just not going to cut it. So here's what to do. Google the phrase job leveling guide. Good companies will make their version of their job leveling guide available to you through HR or post it on the company intranet, but if they don't, just find your own version online. The biggest vendors all use the same basic language and structure so companies can easily link to multiple data sources, and your company is very unlikely to have changed this wording. Next, look at the wording they use to describe each job level. Try to find where your experience and job responsibilities line up on that chart. Then, look at the wording for the next level up in the hierarchy. Your next pay raise and promotion will come from you showing that you are performing work above the job level your company has set your pay to. So what will it take to show this? Step 1, find your place on that job leveling guide. And step 2 requires a bit more risk. Ask your manager or HR about what level your job is benchmarked to internally by your compensation team. If you and HR are on different pages about your job level, that will be a trigger for a job level review and therefore a pay review. If you are underleveled, pointing it out will bypass all the corporate nonsense that typically denies people a pay raise. For someone in my field, we have no defense mechanisms against that. It means we've messed up and we need to fix it right away. If you are appropriately leveled, start to sprinkle in the language of your next job level in conversations with your boss, and especially during your next performance review. If the next level on the leveling guide says, for example, that it typically develops a team budget, ask to start managing the team budget even if you're not necessarily interested in it. Always frame your case for more pay around that job leveling guide, not your title. A director at one company may be called a manager at another company, while that job leveling guide standardizes and normalizes those things across companies, and the resulting pay ranges are the same. Knowing what your company thinks your job level is so critical to assessing your pay, especially if you work for the kind of company where your title is super vague, like head of or creative strategist. Job leveling like this might sound fun and cool, but that vagueness can actually work against you in making sure your pay is fair. Remember that things like vagueness and complexity always favor those with power, so try to break it down simply to them. You should be paid according to the job level of the work you're performing, and you should accept nothing less. This is how we start to close the career gap and in turn the pay gap. It's been an honor speaking with you all today, and I'd encourage you to please stay in touch. You can find me at davidbuckmasterbooks.com, on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about pay, which your company is probably thinking about your pay. And if you do read my book, please drop me a line later this summer to let me know what you think. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the summit.